Dynamic routing. Dynamic routing is a capability that allows routing of the execution down a specific path based on some conditions or parameters. It takes different paths according to given conditions. Let's say there are 3 paths, A, B, and C. You can provide conditions in a logic document, so depending on these logics, it'll select the path. If an input satisfies condition 1, then it takes path A. If an input satisfies condition 2, then it takes path B. Input satisfies condition 3, then it takes path C. Let's try a sample project. It'll take different paths depending on the input country and determine the eligibility of a customer according to predefined rules. Key components will be a router that selects the path and a placeholder that holds the selected path. Let's build this sample project. Create a new project and call it Customer Eligibility. Now create a fact concept within the project, and within that we'll use 2 fact concepts. So open up the toolbox with Alt-X and drag and drop our first fact concept, and we'll name this one Customer, and this will contain information on the country, state, and revenue of a customer. So you right-click on it and add in country, which is a string, state, which is also a string, and revenue, which will be of the type decimal. Drag and drop our next fact concept, and this one's going to be named Selection Criteria. Add in members, and this is just going to have one member called min revenue, that'll represent the minimum revenue, and that's of decimal type. Now we'll create a decision table for our first country, Australia, and this will be used for the minimum revenue that a customer needs for the different states within those countries. Now we'll add in variables that we need for the table. Customer, which is going to be an input and set to that concept. So assembly is concept and type is customer. And we need to create a parameter for selection criteria so we can interact with the selection criteria fact in our concept and set its minimum revenue based on this table. Label the condition column state and the action column minimum revenue. So first add in the expression for the state column customer.state. Then for minimum revenue, selection criteria dot min revenue. And now we just add in values for different states. So we have Victoria with a minimum revenue of $5,000, New South Wales with a minimum revenue of $1,000, South Australia with a min revenue of $3,000. For this table, it's appropriate to use the process all rows property, and we'll set it to false so that once it matches up that state, it doesn't keep going through the table. Just to make sure everything's working, we'll debug this and set our state as New South Wales. In decision tables, when you're debugging, the yellow row is about to execute, and if a row is green, it means the condition on that row was satisfied. So we'll go through this, through each step, and there we go. New South Wales was the condition that was met, and there seemed to be no problems with this decision table. So let's create our next country decision table. We'll duplicate the Australian one and rename it to US. And now add in new states, California with a 500 minimum revenue, New York with 4,000, and Texas, we'll keep it at 3,000. Now debug just to make sure everything worked. And we'll enter in Texas. And now we're stepping through and Texas was selected. Now, if you look in the properties window under selection criteria, you'll see that minimum revenue value is set to 3,000. Now we're going to add a new decision table called select country. And this is where all of our routing is actually done. And all we're going to do here is set up parameters to be assigned to the Australia.xml decision table and the US.xml decision table. So in column A there, we're going to call it country, and in column B, call it selected table for our action. And country needs to be set to customer.country, and selected table should be set to country table, which is a parameter we'll set up later. When we get a country of Australia, our selected table needs to be australia.xml. When we get a country of US, our selected table needs to be us.xml. Now let's create a DRD. This is what's going to be used to orchestrate everything. First, we'll drag and drop an input node and label it input, and that's going to be set to customer in our concept document, and that's all done under type. Then drag and drop a decision node and label it select country table, and then add in a green business knowledge node. This will be our router node. So under logic document and the properties for that node, set the URI to select country and have the input transition to the select country table. So basically this decision is going to be our placeholder for whatever table is selected, and then transition the router node to that table also. So it'll set up the table for it to use. Now let's set up our variables. First, we're going to have the country table. That's going to be the output from our select country decision table. That'll be local, and then selection criteria, which will be set to our selection criteria fact concept. Now within our decision node under properties, check dynamic routing. And this is where we turn on that routing feature. And under logic document, we'll set up the URI. And this URI is going to be a string, so we'll put quotes around it, and it'll go into the country tables folder with a backslash, 2 backslashes, so it's escaped, and then brackets around country table. So it's identifying that as a parameter that's going to have a value. In our case, either australia.xml or us.xml. We'll label that select country, and let's debug it. Set US and New York. And we'll step through this. We can see the routing worked here. Now the whole point of this is to check the eligibility of a customer given their revenue. So we need to do that with a new decision table, and we'll call it check eligibility. Label the condition column check minimum revenue. The action column is customer eligible. Create parameters, a customer parameter with its type set to our fact concept. And same for selection criteria. We're going to add another variable that's going to hold our resulting Boolean value. This is going to be called is customer eligible. And set the value to be false by default. Now under check minimum revenue, we're going to see if customer.revenue is greater than or equal to selection criteria minimum revenue. And for the condition where that's true, we want to set is customer eligible to true. Otherwise, since we set it up here in the variables definition window, is customer eligible will be false by default. Now back in our DRD, drag and drop that decision table, transition from select country table to check eligibility. And now we're going to debug everything. First, we'll test out a customer who lives in Texas and has a revenue of $500,000. Of course, the result for that is true. That is an eligible customer. Now we're going to check a customer that should return false, and they'll live in Victoria with a revenue of 0. And in the parameters window there, you can see the customer eligibility is false. If you're interested in creating projects like this in our Open Decision Intelligence platform, you can get started at flexrule.com.